Let's talk about tonight's game first. Our good friend Zack Bayrouty, the play-by-play man for Pacific, back on BYU Sports Nation. Zach, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, guys. Sorry, I'm trying to join your conversation using my Game Boy, and it just hasn't seemed to be working.
Oh, okay. So you're going to side with Jerem on this one. Okay. I see how it is.
I am. That is a mobile device. So technically, I should be able to join the conversation using my Game Boy.
Most mobile devices. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Okay, that aside, whether or not you can join the conversation with your Game Boy or not, let's talk about this Pacific team. 5 of the top 6 scorers from last year's game against BYU are gone. Clearly, this is a different team, but what is the biggest difference between Pacific basketball last year and this year?
There are a couple things, but I think the biggest thing last year's team was built to compete in the Big West. Last year, obviously, it was Pacific's first year back in the WCC. And it was a senior-laden team last year that had a lot of success in the Big West, a team that had gone to the NCAA tournament the year before last. So I think this year, a new crop of players, and I think this team built to play in the WCC. Now, that being said, it's a young team, so they're going to need some time to develop. So I think youth and inexperience is the biggest difference from last year's team to this year's team.
Our stat of the day, Zach, is that 80 of the 89 points from last year's Pacific win in Stockton against BYU gone. All 6 of those seniors, and then another junior that didn't come back. What kind of team do you think will compete against BYU tonight? A very different team than beat BYU last year.
It's going to be an athletic team. You're going to see a lot of athleticism out of this edition of the Tigers. And that being said, at times I think you'll see this team make some mistakes that last year's team didn't make just because of the youth. But you'll see an athletic team. You'll see a team that, if it's a good night, can really shoot the ball. There's some really good shooters on this team. But that being said, Pacific's coming off of a game against St. Mary's where they shot 35%, and they held St. Mary's to 32% and lost at home. So it's going to be interesting to see which team shows up, because it seems like every game there's a different Pacific team that shows up.
Zack Bayrouty with us, the play-by-play man for Pacific, also of the Class A baseball Stockton Ports. Zach, Pacific is obviously young. We've referenced that a couple of times. 9-8 overall, 1-4 in the West Coast Conference. How do they beat BYU for the second straight year in Stockton?
That's going to be That's a $1 million question for Ron Verlin right now. It's who do you stop? I mean, you can say you can't let Tyler Haws beat you, but then do you let Kyle Collinsworth get a triple-double, and Anson Winder, how do you slow him down? So it's just going to be a matter of can they play enough defense and can they make enough shots? I mean, they played enough defense to beat St. Mary's. They really did as well as they could on Brad Waldo and on Kerry Carter, but they just couldn't make a shot. So the things are just going to have to fall right for them. I mean, you look at, points per game, and BYU's averaging close to 87 a game, and Pacific's averaging just close to 66. So, it's going to be two things. Can they limit BYU offensively, and can they get some shots to fall? I don't know if it comes down to one matchup or another. I don't think it does, just because BYU is so multifaceted. But overall, they're going to need to play great defense, and they're going to need to make some shots.
Does Pacific have the wing defenders to hang with the guards of BYU, in your opinion?
That's a tough question. Right now I don't think so. Right now I would say that's where BYU has a big advantage. And again, on any given night, who knows? I thought their plan against St. Mary's was to play denial on Kerry Carter, and they actually did a really good job. Carter made a couple of big threes, but there was only a couple of attempts coming out of him, so they denied him the ability to beat them, and it worked. So, I mean, that being said, they can do the same thing to BYU, but there are just so many threats that the Cougars bring to the table that I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it.
Zack Bayrouty with us on BYU Sports Nation, talking Pacific and BYU, 11 Eastern, 9 Mountain Time tip, 8 on the Pacific Coast. So, Zach, it's not as late for you. But as you look at this game, you talked about Tyler Haws and Kyle Collinsworth. There's a chance that Anson Winder won't play. He's dealing with a slight knee sprain. besides those three big guns, is there anybody else that Pacific is keyed on or worried about on this BYU basketball roster?
I don't think so. I mean, there's obviously, you could talk about Luke Worthington and, someone like that or Chase Fisher, but I think they're just keyed in on Hawes and they're keyed in on Collinsworth. And, those are the two guys you have to be able to stop if you want to have any kind of a chance. So that being said, I don't think there's, anybody outside of those two that they're really keyed in on per se. I think Hawes and Collinsworth are the two that they're really, really looking for tonight.
You talked about St. Mary's. That's BYU's next game. Major concern for BYU fans to try and for the Cougars to go in there and try and get a win after this game against Pacific. What was your impression of St. Mary's this season?
They just always seem to win. I was rewatching the television broadcast, and the TV analyst Dan Belwamini said that Randy Bennett hasn't won all those games for nothing. I mean, they just have a toughness about them. I mean, they shot so poorly. It was tough to watch at times. St. Mary's shot 32.7% against Pacific on the road and won. So that should tell you something about them, that they can shoot that poorly and win on the road. Brad Waldo is going to get his. I mean, he's averaging a double-double. I think he's still the only player in the nation averaging a double-double. And they have guys that can beat you from the perimeter. I mean, they have, Kerry Carter. They were able to stop him a little bit. But Emmett Nair was kind of an X factor for them, another wing that was able to make three huge three-pointers and really back-breaking three-pointers. So it's like whack-a-mole when you play St. Mary's. Like, once you think you've gotten one, there's another one that pops up. And for the defense, it's kind of frustrating. But I think Pacific did about as good a job defensively as they could do, limiting St. Mary's quality shots, and they still won. So I think, what strikes me most about St. Mary's is they're battle-tested. They've won big games on the road. They beat Creighton at Creighton. They almost beat St. John's. They blew a big lead on the road in Queens. So they're a team that's tested, and they'll be ready to go, and they'll be geared up for that Saturday game versus the Cougars.
Zach, what is worse, watching a basketball game where the two teams combine to shoot 6 for 32 from the three-point line, or calling a baseball game, let's say in the fifth inning when it's like 15-1?
Calling a baseball game, because at least there's a clock in a basketball game. You know how much time's left, and you know that it can't be that way forever. And there have been some baseball games I've called, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to go on forever. Like, there's not an end in sight. So I'd say baseball is the worst, but it was really tough in that, especially in that first half. I mean, I think it was a second media timeout, or with 10 minutes left, it was like 8-8. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the right score, but I mean, it was gross. But at the same time, that boded well for Pacific. I mean, it meant they were playing good defense, and they had a chance. And St. Mary's had a 12-point lead at one point, and Tigers were able to kind of get back into it. So it actually became an exciting game despite those awful shooting percentages.
Who do you think finishes as the 2 seed in the WCC?
I think, it's either going to be BYU or St. Mary's. I would, if you held a gun to my head, I would say BYU. I would say just because they have so many more threats than St. Mary's. I think BYU is much more talented offensively. So I would say BYU, and unless St. Mary's can take one of two from Gonzaga, and one of two from BYU, which I don't think is going to happen. I think Gonzaga will win both. I'll say BYU.
Zack Bayrouty, play-by-play for Pacific and the Class A Stockton Ports on the baseball field. Great to have you again, Zach.
Spencer, Jaron, thanks, guys.